Mia challenges Akagami to a duel in an effort to protect the temple from his inappropriate behavior. She warns him that if he loses, she's going to castrate him. Akagami, upon hearing her threat, begins considering castration as an option to suppress his desires. Meanwhile, Yuzuki asks Akagami to take care of the temple while she's away and requests that he make amends with Mia. In the background, Kagura assists Mia with her clothing by wrapping her huge assets. After Yuzuki and her sisters depart from the temple, Mia confronts Akagami, demanding respect as her senior in the temple. She also discloses that she is a foreign exchange student, and Kagura introduces herself as Mia's attendant. Akagami, trying to defuse the situation, suggests canceling the duel. However, Mia was still furious about an incident where Akagami accidentally exposed her chest during their initial encounter. Frustrated with his apparent forgetfulness, Mia insists on proceeding with the duel. With real swords in hand, Kagura signals the start of the duel by clapping her hands. Mia, to emphasize her seriousness, cuts off a portion of Akagami's hair and warns that the next strike would draw blood. Akagami realizes that he is in a difficult situation, but he can't bring himself to harm Mia. So when Mia lunged at him, he dropped his sword and attempted a makeshift, secret bare-handed sword-stopping technique. Simultaneously, Kagura grabbed the fabric from Mia's shirt, unintentionally revealing her impressive assets. Akagami, tempted by the heavenly sight, closes his eyes and reaches out for the prize. He manages to touch Mia's soft and supple chest, causing her to faint from embarrassment. Following the eventful duel, Kagura announces that Mia would face a penalty from her Book of Penances, which contains rather explicit punishments. Mia reluctantly agrees, but Akagami intervenes, expressing his desire for something else and pointing to the book. However, due to her overwhelming embarrassment and her focus on her own chest, Mia misunderstands Akagami's intentions, thinking he is implying something sexual. Akagami further confuses the situation by mentioning that he is going to be gentle and wants a single night full of variety of experiences, causing Mia to flee in embarrassment. Later that fateful night, Akagami wakes to a surprising sight: Mia perched atop him, a determined glint in her eyes. She declares her intent to resolve their unfinished business and tantalizingly presents her generous bosom to him. With a seductive undertone in her voice, she emphasizes that this is to be a solitary, dreamlike night of passion. However, in the haze of slumber, Akagami, believing it all to be a vivid dream, gives in to his lust and allows his hands to approach those two captivating mountains. Just as his fingers hover in anticipation, a sudden intrusion shatters the illusion. Kagura, holding a camera and a signboard urging them to go all night long, squatting at the doorway, leaves Akagami in a state of panic. Reality dawns on him, and he tells Mia that she shouldn't give her chastity if she is reluctant and wants to part with the Book of Penances. Mia, upon hearing Akagami's revelation, flees from the room in embarrassment and humiliation, whereas Kagura whispers a cryptic message into Akagami's ear as they watch Mia's hot-tempered exit. Seeking solitude, Mia retreats to the temple's shed for meditation, only to find Akagami already inside, all thanks to Kagura's devious scheme. Frustrated, she ignores his inquiries and attempts to exit, only to discover that the door is locked, courtesy of Kagura's mischievous antics. With the prospect of spending the entire night locked in the shed, Akagami scours the surroundings for anything useful and stumbles upon a cozy blanket. Concerned for Mia's well-being, he approaches her with the blanket, hoping it can ward off the chill. However, her response is a cautionary warning to maintain distance, as she fears arousing her own desires. This emotional outburst prompts Mia to share her family's peculiar curse of lechery, which led her and Kagura to seek refuge in an all-female temple, striving to suppress such desires. Akagami emphasizes revealing his own struggles and history, forging a connection between them. Acknowledging their shared predicament, they make a pact to support one another in resisting temptation. Their heartfelt moment, however, gets abruptly interrupted as Kagura swings open the door, offering her Book of Penances as a guide in their shared objective. The prospect of this bizarre journey fuels their determination. The next morning, as Yuzuki is sweeping the temple grounds, she notices Kagura stationed at the shed door with a camera. Curious, she approaches and, following the attendant's gesture to remain silent, quietly observes the door's interior, where both Akagami and Mia are uttering suggestive phrases, but in fact, they are just playing Twister. Furthermore, from her obstructed view, it appears that the two are connected, and Kagura's mischievous remark about their night-long struggle leads Yuzuki to scream in exasperation. Sometime later, Kiki reminds Yuzuki of her rescheduled matchmaking meeting, which had slipped her mind. Grasping the urgency, she and Akagami embark on a race to Ryokoku Temple, where the meeting would decide the temple's fate. Yuzuki also shares her unwavering commitment to marriage to safeguard the temple's future with Akagami. Despite missing the bus, they find themselves inadvertently confined in the back of a truck. Yuzuki's spirits sag from the stake of misfortune, but Akagami uplifts her with his encouraging words, suggesting they use their temporary privacy to change clothes and await the next red signal to make their escape. Fired up by Akagami's optimism, Yuzuki resolves to don her yukata and take matters into her own hands, determined to break free from their vehicular confinement at the next opportune moment. Finally reaching Ryukoku Temple after persuading the truck driver to lend him his vehicle, Yuzuki gracefully enters the temple grounds. As her silhouette fades into the distance, Akagami can't help but start a quiet monologue, wrestling with his inner turmoil about their relationship. However, his solitary thoughts get abruptly interrupted by a nearby priestess, who seemed to appear out of nowhere. She briskly ushers him inside the temple, mistaking him for a temple worker due to his attire. Meanwhile, in the temple's serene courtyard, Yuzuki fits face-to-face with her potential fiancé, Kijo, and the two politely greet each other. In a composed manner, Yuzuki begins introducing herself and adds in tidbits about her family and friends. But her attempt to introduce herself gets interrupted as her gaze darted accidentally toward the figure of Akagami, who was diligently wielding a broom just outside the courtyard. Akagami, torn between jealousy and desire, couldn't help but let his imagination run wild as he ogled Yuzuki's captivating form. His lascivious thoughts, however, get disrupted when he notices Yuzuki's obvious distress. It becomes evident to him that his presence is causing her considerable discomfort. Before Akagami can discreetly distance himself, the very same priestess who had earlier mistaken him for a temple worker now mistook him for the matchmaker. Consequently, he finds himself thrust into the role of the official matchmaker, a situation he had not anticipated. To alleviate the awkward atmosphere, Akagami initiates a conversation with Kijo, delving into various topics related to dating and relationships. But his internal struggle is apparent as he wrestles to restrain his carnal desires, his mind continuously imagining lewd images of Yuzuki. However, when Kijo casually mentions his desire for 10 children after marriage, Akagami's mental imagery reaches an absurd climax, an almost naked Yuzuki pleading for babies, causing him to spit out blood and lose consciousness. Observing this, Kijo reassures Yuzuki that Akagami seemed genuine in his intentions, resembling the friends that she had described. This prompts Yuzuki to recall a childhood lesson about the wrongfulness of deception, making her feel guilty about her initial plan to manipulate Kijo into becoming her fiancé and head priest. Overwhelmed by remorse, Yuzuki confesses her initial intentions to Kijo, explaining that she had intended to break off the engagement once she qualified to assume the role of head priestess. Listening empathetically to her plight, Kijo advises that Mikazuki Temple might not be worth the effort, and its closure might be the better thing. However, an unexpected turn of events occur as Akagami, who had regained consciousness, fervently begs on Yuzuki's behalf. In a heartfelt plea, he expresses his determination to support her in her endeavors. Slyly, Kijo coaxes Akagami into reciting the marriage vows, to which the oblivious young man responds positively. On the sidelines, Yuzuki panics as it seems to sound like a marriage proposal. Kijo ultimately agrees to a fake engagement, a move that would ensure the temple's continued operation. He clarifies that he is merely lending his name to the cause. Following this decision, Kijo meets with Ryukoku Temple's head priestess, Aoba, and reveals his change of heart. He confesses that he has grown interested in Akagami and opted against Aoba's wishes to persuade Yuzuki to close the temple. Kijo also admits to employing the same manipulative tactics as Aoba. The head priestess ignores this remark and mumbles that he isn't the man's son and utters Akagami. Sometime later, Yuzuki and Akagami are en route to the train station, having missed the last bus. As they walk along, Akagami can't contain his joy at the prospect of Yuzuki not entering into a marriage. This unexpected turn of events means he won't have to vacate the temple, and the relief washes over him. Upon hearing Akagami's words, Yuzuki, her eyes moistening, swiftly moves up behind him, gently covering his eyes with her hands to shield her teary emotions from his gaze. However, Akagami manages to catch a glimpse of her face, teasing her for the unique combination of tears and blush on her cheeks. After a brief walk, the duo arrive at the train station, only to discover that they have also missed the last train of the day. Their streak of misfortune persists as they struggle to find a taxi, their attempts to book a cab thwarted by Yuzuki's dead phone and Akagami's crushed one. With the late hour weighing on them, they scour the area for a place to stay, only to find that the sole available option is a love hotel. Resolute in their decision to find shelter for the night, Akagami once again battles his worldly desires, but Yuzuki's playful nudges lead them to reluctantly or not check into the Love Hotel. Inside the room, Yuzuki peruses through the various catalogs featuring cosplay costumes and adult videos. She shares them with Akagami, who, struggling to suppress his urges, resorts to tossing them at the wall. Following this fiasco, as they sit at a distance from each other on the bed, an awkward silence settles in. Yuzuki eventually breaks the silence, surprising Akagami by suggesting he take a shower. In the bathroom, Akagami grapples with his inner turmoil, attempting to convince himself that Yuzuki is not seducing him. Unbeknownst to him, Yuzuki, in the adjacent room, is indulging in an adult video, listening to the passionate moans of the actress. Just as the moans reach a crescendo, Akagami returns from his shower, prompting Yuzuki to hurriedly shut off the video. Left alone in the room, Akagami can't resist the temptation to prove his suspicion and turns on the TV. Witnessing the two mounds of flesh on the screen, he confirms that Yuzuki had been watching an adult video. Struggling to control his desires, especially after suspecting Yuzuki's motive in sending him for a shower, Akagami concludes that drastic measures are necessary for her safety. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Yuzuki, her emotions still tumultuous, remembers the events of the day and begins considering the possibility of making love with Akagami. However, as she leaves the bath, her hopes are dashed as she finds Akagami chained to the wall. Seeing Yuzuki in her bathrobe, Akagami assures her, much to her chagrin, that she can sleep peacefully without concern for her safety. Yuzuki decides to place a blindfold on the chained Akagami and goes to sleep, seemingly ignoring his plight and her desires. Akagami and Yuzuki return from the Love Hotel and run into Tsukuyo, who asks them about their whereabouts. Unable to give an answer which could even remotely sum up the utterly strange night the two had, they decided to stay silent before Tsuki budges them to answer. After receiving a very awkward answer from the two, she lightly suggests that they're being suspicious before getting ready to leave for school with Yuzuki. On their way, Tsukuyo teases Yuzuki about her complicated relationship with Akagami. The fact that they were at a love hotel and nothing happened appears too absurd to her, since she thinks Yuzuki had an affair with Akagami since the date of former's failed engagement. For Yuzuki, however, nothing could ever happen between the two, and the only reason they stayed at a love hotel was due to compulsion. Before entering school, however, Tsukuyo returns to her usual hot-headed self, warning Yuzuki not to mention Akagami at school for it would tarnish the reputation of their temple. The latter, still too flustered after her night of stifled desires and constraint, half-heartedly abides. At school, Tsuki's classmates Mana and Yuki teasingly inform her of rumors of her kissing a boy in a monk's robe in the rain. While trying to explain that it didn't happen, Tsukuyo finds out that the rumors have become all the rage in their school due to her and Yuzuki's popularity among boys. While Yuzuki Aoba is known for her unwavering beauty, her sister Tsukuyo is renowned for her massive breasts. As the younger Aoba sister worries about the Akagami secret coming out, she sees a red-haired man wearing a monk's robe in the school playground, carrying her tiffin. Realizing that the temple's secret can be revealed because of her own carelessness, she rushes downstairs and drags Akagami to a nearby infirmary before he can disclose his own identity. While Akagami is confused regarding Tsukuyo's reaction, he is very quickly forced into a very awkward position when Mana and Yuki come to visit Tsuki. Trying her hardest not to disclose the infamous monk's presence, she hides him between her legs on the infirmary bed, trying her hardest to squeeze him upwards while also forcing the latter into, let's just say, tempting situations. Before her friends finally leave, they mention Tsukuyo's absence from the archery club, wishing for her quick return. Akagami overhears this, while stuck between her breasts in a state equivalent to nirvana, but before he has the chance to encourage her to resume her practices, Mana and Yuki re-enter the room only to see Tsuki on top of Akagami. Only adding to her own rumors, Tsukuyo reaches the peak of her embarrassment. Meanwhile, unaware of the context behind her embarrassment, Akagami keeps inquiring about Tsuki's absence from the archery club, casually claiming that he will help her re-enter it as soon as possible. In the subsequent days, Tsukuyo, in a temporary state of isolation, thinks back to her archery days when she used to admire Yuzuki's skills. The latter's decision to quit archery for the sake of looking after the temple is what disillusioned Tsukuyo as well. Tsukuyo saw her decision as very selfless and decided not to pursue archery after this. At the temple, we see Akagami see Yuzuki do archery behind the temple, asking her why Tsukuyo has paused her archery club participation. Here, he comes to know that the latter quit the club a long time ago. From there, he decides to get to know the reason for her decision. As Akigami successfully runs into her nostalgically scouring through the archery club's tools, he finds out that her decision to quit was because of Yuzuki. How could she continue to live selfishly when her much more talented sister had already given up? It turns out, however, that Tsukuyo had crafted a fabrication on what really happened. As Akigami very quickly exposes to her, Yuzuki has kept on practicing archery behind the temple's main hall. The embarrassing fact, however, is that the elder Aoba sister is just not very skilled at the art, which is what actually led her to quit the club. Though she initially is still captivated by her sister's impeccable posture, she quickly realizes that Yuzuki is a horrific archer, despite being at it for over a year after quitting the club. Tsukuyo's shock quickly turns into flustered embarrassment as her friends expose her unending admiration for Yuzuki, which also forces the latter to start blushing. At last, Yuzuki requests her younger sister to teach her archery, which is something Tsuki readily accepts, even though the task is near impossible. As night falls on the temple, Tsukuyo accidentally runs into Akigami naked, but stops after closing the door to thank him for his role in her return to archery. The latter informs her of his happiness at decisions people take that are not constrained by family pressures. Blushing after hearing about Akigami's happiness at her decision, she re-enters the room and reminds him of the hickey he gave her at the infirmary. As payback, she lures him in for a kiss but then ends up drawing lewd Mitsu on his forehead. Akigami, who is caught lacking by his own carnal desires, decides to accept this justified humiliation. The next day, Tsukuyo intentionally forgets to bring her lunch so that Akigami can come to school and watch her during archery training. When Mana and Yuki tease her for bringing her boyfriend to school, she refers to Akigami as not as a boyfriend, but as family. While writing her diary, accompanied by her pet cat, Aoba Kurage reflects on how much the temple and their family has changed following Akigami's arrival. Urged on by Kiku to start a diary as a tool of self-reflection and growth, Kurage reassures herself of how adult she has become in recent days, with the diary as proof of that. More interestingly, she also associates her personal development with Akigami, stating that as long as he's around, she'll never run out of things to write about. Meanwhile, Yuzuki calls an all-girls meeting to discuss a serious issue the temple's inhabitants have been facing since Akigami's arrival: gaining weight. Anxious about how much her weight has increased, she, and eventually her compatriots, come to the conclusion that the new member's tendency to cook delicious meals has had a detrimental impact on their weight. Though refusing to admit that fact, everyone starts pouring in suggestions on how to tackle this curse which Akigami has inflicted upon their once harmonious equilibrium. Eventually, they come to the consensus that the only way they can control this curse is through age-old practice of exercising. Wow, who would have thought? To put it shortly though, that option is deemed a failure after only a day. While everyone is inspired by Kagura's ability to keep her shape due to being an adult, the others can't seem to think of any other way but to start dieting, an option which immediately causes them immense sadness. However, Tsukuyo deems that embarrassing because Akigami would find out about it if they ask him to cook less food. The others start teasing her for this, with Kagura suggesting that Tsuki should marry him. While said in jest, Kurage takes this very seriously, claiming that if they were to get married, Akigami would have to stay here forever, which is something Kurage really desires, mainly because of the hold his food has over her stomach. Tsuki reverses the judgment and tells Kurage to marry him instead, an offer which she strangely accepts very readily. Soon the crew eventually comes to grips with the fact that their recent weight gain, which is more or less concentrated in their upper body, is due to their natural growth. However, just as this closure is taking place, Akigami enters the main hall proudly exclaiming that he has made Japanese sweets for everyone, which triggers mixed reactions. The girls spend the entire night finishing his sweets, eventually declaring the weight scales as out of order to give themselves some closure and to avoid thinking about their respective weights. At night, Kurage once again writes about Akigami's food, wondering whether he would wait for her to become an adult. The next day, Yuzuki requests Akigami to include pickled radishes into her dishes, a random request which the latter obliges. However, Akigami is also shocked to see Yuzuki carrying an axe with her and using it very violently just outside the kitchen. The two random events lead him to think that Yuzuki is planning his execution, which prompts him to cook all of her favorite dishes along with the radishes. However, upon getting no reaction from Yuzuki, he leaves the room awaiting his inevitable execution. Soon, he runs into Yuzuki again, who this time is begging for his help because she can't feel her legs. As he witnesses Kiku poke her feet despite Yuzuki's pleas to stop, Akigami is taken aback, not just by the randomness of everything, but also by its strangely sexual implications. He then finds out that Yuzuki is training for her head temple position, which involves exercises such as this one, chopping firewood and not speaking a word while eating. Seeing her excruciating training program, Akigami begins to admire Yuzuki even more. Before he can express this, Kiku asks him if he wishes to start his own training alongside Yuzuki, since his services to the temple are more than enough to qualify him. Akigami readily accepts her offer, and Yuzuki is very encouraged to have another training partner alongside her. Soon, Mia also joins the training program, a decision which excites Akigami more than it does Yuzuki, the latter wanting to have a more intimate training experience with Akigami. The excitement Akigami feels at undergoing training is quickly squashed when he is reminded that he still has to undergo Tokudo in order to become a priest. These sets of training exercises have not even been started by Yuzuki, and are essential to gaining enlightenment. Akigami soon realizes that the immense effort it took to stifle his carnal desires gave him the false impression that he has already become a priest. Remembering how far he is from accomplishing that, he quickly loses all the strength it took for him to not give in to his perversive desires. Stuck between Kiku's breasts and with a massive nosebleed which causes him to become practically dysfunctional, he reverts to his original state after seeing Yuzuki come back from her teizu, which is feet, exercises. Kiku sends her off to chop firewood and remarks to everyone that even though Yuzuki herself has not started Tokudo, it is her mentality to become the head priest as quickly as possible, which differentiates her from the rest of the inhabitants of the temple. The situation is suddenly impeded upon by the entrance of Yuzuki's fiancée in the temple, a presence which greatly irks Kiku. While everyone wonders why Hoan-san is here, a dispirited Akigami glooms in a corner waiting for him to leave and worrying whether there are particular lower body exercises the two have to perform together. However, everyone's thinking changes when they see the usually calm Kiku lose her cool over Yuzuki's fiancée's insistence that her training is lagging behind. She boasts that, despite the strict training program which Tokudo requires, Yuzuki would be able to start it within 6 months and become a high priest sooner rather than later. For Hoan-san, however, this won't do. If Yuzuki is unable to start her Tokudo program in 3 months' time, he declares that he would call off the engagement.